So this is session number 4 to understand Agile methodology, Scrum framework. Objective of the today's session. So I'll be explaining you in detail. So we'll be learning below topics. What is product backlog? Epics, user stories, spikes, epics, user stories, spikes, and Scrum ceremonies. Scrum ceremonies. What is product backlog, epics, user stories, spikes, and Scrum ceremonies? So what are the Scrum ceremonies? Sprint planning meeting, daily Scrum meeting, sprint review meeting, sprint retrospective meeting, Okay, and fourth one, responsibilities of product owner, Scrum Master, and Scrum development team. Responsibilities of product owner, Scrum Master, and Scrum development team. Okay. So these are the few points which are pending for the discussion today and tomorrow. 2 days I will be explaining you these topics. What is product backlog, epics, user stories, spikes, Scrum ceremonies, all these things, these 4 topics will be elaborately explained in today and tomorrow session. Okay, so as I told yesterday, step 1, product owner is responsible to provide initial product backlog. Product owner is responsible to provide initial product backlog. So, okay, let me tell you a project kind of thing, and I'll show you initial product backlog, how it looks like. For example, we have, we are working for an insurance company. So recently insurance company decided to upgrade their product, and they decided to deliver this project in Agile. So first they have to express what business want as part of this Agile upgrade. Okay. Please go on self-mute. As part of this Agile upgrade in the form of epics. Epic is nothing but epic story. Epic story. Epic story. So example of epics. Few epics I will read. Epic 1. Upgrade insurance JSON API to ensure multi-payment functionality. To ensure multi-payment functionality. Upgrade JSON API to ensure multi-payment functionality. Epic 2. Upgrade insurance API to ensure payment cancellation. Earlier, payment cancellation was not there. To ensure payment cancellation functionality. And Epic 3. Upgrade insurance API to ensure edit payment details. Edit payment details by end users. Okay, these are the three high-level epics. So, how it can be written epics properly? So epic is nothing but a big requirement. So initially epics will be identified. Epic 1, just I am rewriting. As an insurance user, I must be flexible to do payment multiple options so that I need not to use one payment method always. Epic 2. As an insurance user, as an insurance user, I need cancellation functionality. I need cancellation functionality to payment so that I can cancel payment which is no longer required. I can cancel payment which is no longer required. I can cancel the payment which is no longer required. Epic 3. As an insurance user, I need edit payment functionality. I need edit payment functionality so that I can edit payment details. Edit payment details so that I can edit payment details. Okay, so insurance user, I must be flexible to do payment with multiple options so that I need to use one payment method always. As an insurance user, I need cancellation functionality to payment so that I can cancel the payment which is no longer required. An insurance user, I need to edit payment functionality to payment. So these are the big requirements which we call it as an epic. So these epics are the part of the product backlog. So initially your initial product backlog contains epics. So these epics further break down to user stories. So epics will be break down to user stories. Epics will be break down to user stories. So user story means the difference between epic and user story. The difference between epic and user story Difference between epic and user story. Epic is a big requirement which cannot be fit into a release, which cannot be fit into a sprint. So you cannot deliver. Epic is a larger in size. You cannot fit into a sprint. So epic can fit into a release. Break down epics into user stories. Break down epic into user stories. So story can fit into sprint. Story can fit into sprint. Means, for example, you are working in a project. Every 2 months you have one release. Example, every 2 months you have one release. This release one is break down to, let's say, 4 sprints. Sprint 1, 2 weeks. Sprint 1, 2 weeks. Sprint 2, 2 weeks. Sprint 2, 2 weeks. Sprint 3, 2 weeks. Sprint 4, 2 weeks. This final sprint goes to production. Every sprint outcome demo will be given. Demo to business. It's a working software only. Demo to business. Demo to business. Demo to business. And this will be deployed to production. This will be deployed to production. This will be deployed to production. So this will be deployed to production. So what I wanted to tell. Here, see, epic means you cannot, your 2 weeks time. So epic is a larger requirement. A larger requirement. It cannot fit into a sprint. So you need more time than sprint. So initially, your product owner may give initial requirements in the form of epics. Later, epics will be converted to user stories. Later, epics will be converted to user stories. For example, if you take this epic, for example, if you take this as an epic, let's say here we have one epic. So I'll be identifying user stories for this epic. User story 1. User story 1. Okay, so user story 1. As an insurance user, I need payment option with the credit card so that I can easily do payments. User story 2. As an insurance user, I need payment option with the debit card so that I can easily do payment without depending on credit card. User story 3. I'm identifying user story. User story 3. As an insurance user, I need payment option with UPI so that I can do payments without depending on credit and debit cards. So this kind of format can be used to write user story or define user story. So user story 4. So I need to do payment option with wallets. So I can do easily payment with it depending on debit cards and credit cards and UPI also. So these are the 4 different user stories and which is break down to this epic and understand user story definition. User story definition. User story is a simple requirement. User story is a simple requirement which delivers business value. User story is a simple requirement which delivers business value. For example, if anyone, if anyone break down this epic like this, these are the 4 user stories we identified. So this kind of breakdown is not allowed. So bad way of writing user story. Bad way of writing user story or the below kind of breakdown is not allowed to write user story. For example, as an insurance user, I want UI design for multi-payment options. Multi-payment options. Story 1. For example, if anyone writes, these are not the stories. I'll tell you why also. Story 2. As an insurance user, I want a database design for all multi-payment options. Story 3. As an insurance user, I want business logic for multi-payment options. Story 4. As an insurance user, I want UI logic, business logic. I want UI logic, business logic, and application logic for database logic for multi-payment options. So this method of breakdown epic into user story is not allowed in Agile because these stories, if you look at these stories individually, they are not generating. So these above stories are not generating business value. Above stories are not generating business value. Above stories are not generating business value. So these above stories are not generating business value. These above stories are not generating business value. Okay, so every story, one important characteristic. Okay, what is a user story? Every story must generate business value. Every story must generate business value. For example, in sprint 1, if you launch UI, if you complete UI, will they use only UI without database and application logic? No. So we call it as, so whenever you get an epic, so epic is a large requirement of Agile project. Epics can further break down to user stories. And so these epics, to break down further into user stories, there are 2 types of slicing: horizontal slicing. So break down user stories into like vertical slicing. So what horizontal slicing means, like break down the stories, UI based stories, database based stories. This is not allowed. And remember, vertical slicing means every story must generate business value. Every story must generate business value. So here, if you look at the first method, so let's say in sprint 1, you plan this story. For example, of course, all multi options may not be ready in sprint 1, but at least one option is ready. Sprint 2, which is incremental version, so you can plan debit card in second sprint. You can plan wallets in third sprint. But remember, every sprint outcome or every story outcome must generate a business value. So only one simple tip, okay, of how to write user stories in Agile projects. Okay, so every story must generate business value. Every story must generate business value. Okay, every story must generate business value. Second one, every story must be simple. Need not to provide too many details. Need not to provide too many details. Okay, every story must express. Every story must express user perspective. Every story must express user perspective. Part of something of product end to end will be delivered for each sprint. Part of something, yes, yeah. Yes, perfect, Pawan Kumar. So every story must be simple. Every story must be simple. Okay, and need not to provide too many details. Need not to provide too many details. Every story must reflect user perspective. Must reflect user perspective. Every story must reflect user perspective. Every story must reflect user perspective. Every story must reflect user perspective. Okay, so these are the few characteristics. And no, Srinivas, okay, story and sprint not are the same. Sprint is a time box. Sprint is a time box. Let's say 2 weeks. During the sprint, we will convert couple of stories into working software. We will convert couple of stories into working software. We'll convert couple of stories into working software. During the sprint, we'll convert couple of stories into working software. So story is a requirement. Sprint is a time. So every sprint is kind of a mini project. Every sprint is kind of a mini project. So during the sprint we convert user stories into. During the sprint we convert user stories into. We convert user stories into working software. During the sprint, we convert user stories into working software. During the sprint, we convert user stories into working software. Hope Srinivas, is it clear to you? Okay. So now, so hope you understand the user story. What are the user stories? You understand the user stories. Okay, epics you understand user story. And see, user story need not to provide too many details. Stories are used for conversation. Stories are used for conversation and collaboration. So based on the story, we discuss with business team, business developers or testers, Scrum business and Scrum development team members. So Scrum development team members. So business and Scrum development team members discuss about the story and implement. So you need not to provide two. Story is a card. It's a very basic card. So story used for conversation. So stories can be written in Excel sheet. So stories can be written in Excel, or stories can be written in Excel, or stories can be managed in Jira tool also. Stories can be managed in tools like Jira, Rally. So stories can be managed in tools like Jira, Rally. So these kind of tools we can manage stories. Stories can be managed in Jira, Rally kind of tools also. So stories can be written in Excel. Stories can be managed in Jira, Rally kind of a tools also. So how you are managing your stories, it is up to you. So you can write all your product backlog items. So now product backlog items are number one, epics and user stories. And there is one more category. For example, Ramana, how to write user stories. How to write user stories in Jira tool. If you are not clear, so I may not cover in 6 hours class. Like you can go to you can go to our Quality Thought YouTube channel. So where I clearly explained how to write user stories in Jira tool. How to write user stories in Jira tool. So you can go to Jira playlist. So there are 4 sessions and more sessions I'll be adding. So here I have clearly explained in the Jira playlist. I have clearly explained how to write user stories by using Jira. So you can go through this Jira playlist. Okay. If you want to know how to write user stories in Jira. So no, Shashi, scenarios and epics are not same. So what do you mean by scenarios in your opinion, Shashi? So if you are considering about test scenarios, epics or test scenarios are not same. Epic is a big requirement. Epic is your business requirement kind of. Epic will further break down to user story. User story will be further converted to test scenario. Epic will be converted to user story. User story converted to test scenario, test cases. That is the order, Shashi. So people who wants to know more about how to write user stories in Jira tool, you can go to our YouTube channel. Okay, so I can copy this URL also to you in the chat. The Zoom chat I can. So this is the, I'm sending in the Zoom chat. So when we can expect Jira continuation classes, as Srinivas, few more topics are there. Directly I'll be uploading the video in Learning Thoughts YouTube channel. Okay, so now you understand product backlog. So product backlog items, third one is, so now you understand Epic's user story. One more category is there, spikes. So spikes are nothing but a kind of user story. Spikes are a kind of agile requirement, which is used for analysis, research, and observation. So these kind of things we call it as spikes. For example, a defect is not reproducible. A defect is not reproducible. A defect is not reproducible. The defect is not reproducible. Okay, so need analysis on feasibility, need some analysis of a feature. We need to observe how one functionality is, observe server monitoring or observe servers kind of. So these kind of things, you are not really developing increment. You are not really developing software. So if you are not really creating a software increment, if you are not really, guys, please go on self mute if you are not speaking. Otherwise, I need to. Surendra, you are not in muted. So please, so everyone, so please go on self mute. Otherwise, I need to force mute kind of thing. Then it is not good actually. So please go on mute. So observe servers. So defect is not reproducible. Need analysis of a feature. So these kind of stories we call it as a spike. Spike is a special requirement which may not create outcome, which may not produce outcome as a software. It is used for analysis, research, observation, for such kind of things. So we generally go with the spikes. So product backlog contains three types of product backlog items. Those are called epics, user stories, and spikes. So once we got epics, user stories, and spikes, okay. So before starting off every new sprint, team participates in backlog refinement meeting or backlog grooming meeting. Okay, so to add, so team participates in backlog refinement meeting or backlog grooming meeting to add more details to user stories, more details like adding acceptance criteria, adding preliminary estimates, adding preliminary estimates, adding tasks required, sizing of user stories, based on complexity, of user story. So there is a backlog refinement meeting. Purpose of the backlog refinement meeting is adding acceptance criteria to user story, adding preliminary estimate, adding tasks required, sizing of user stories based on complexity of a story. So what do you mean by acceptance criteria? So acceptance criteria here, product owner, Scrum development team, everyone participate. They discuss adding acceptance criteria. So why acceptance criteria is required? See, why acceptance criteria is required? Okay, so there should be shared understanding between business and development team. There should be shared understanding between business and development team. There should be shared understanding between business and development team. There should be shared understanding between business and development team. To decide when we can say story is complete. So to say story is complete, it is better to define acceptance criteria that brings transparency between business and development team. Let me tell you one real example. For example, you have ordered fruits in big basket. If you have ordered fruits in big basket, there is an acceptance criteria. If any fruits are damaged, you have to report within 3 hours or 4 hours. If you tell after 4 days, okay, fruits are damaged, so then that's why, to avoid such kind of conflict, the big basket has to come up with a proper acceptance criteria. So to decide when business accept working software, story as working software, So to decide when business accept story as working software, there must be acceptance criteria agreed between business and development team, and which is defined before starting of the sprint itself. So any story without acceptance criteria cannot be considered for planning of a sprint. So this is acceptance criteria has to be defined. So without defining the acceptance criteria, you cannot consider that story for planning. Because even though you develop it, business may reject it. So there should be shared understanding. So when business accept that story as a software, that has to be written, and that is called acceptance criteria. When business accept that story as a software, that has to be written, and that is called acceptance criteria. That is called acceptance criteria. So acceptance criteria must be defined properly. Acceptance criteria must be defined properly. Okay, so without defining the acceptance criteria, it is like, so it is not a complete story. So example of acceptance criteria. So example of acceptance criteria. Let's say if we'll take one example. So for the story, this is, so I'll be rating. So so for this story, I'm rating the acceptance criteria. So one story I'll be taking and rating acceptance criteria. One story I'll be taking and rating the acceptance criteria. So this is user story, and we rate acceptance criteria here. Okay, so acceptance criteria. So here you see acceptance criteria example of. So you can write in a bullet points format. One. Okay, so payment successful message must be displayed if credit card details are correct, credit card details are valid, if credit card details are valid, if invalid credit card details, then error message must be displayed. If invalid credit card details, then error message must be displayed. Okay, so payment success message must send it to email within less than 1 minute. So this could be acceptance criteria, an example of acceptance criteria. So story description explains what customer want. Acceptance criteria explains when customer accept this as a software. So when customer accept this as a software, so that will be there in the acceptance criteria. Yeah. So we have a question from Meghana Joshi. Okay. Who are participating in product backlog? Product owner and development team. Product owner and development team participate. So they discuss and do this task. And Ridhita Banerjee, acceptance criteria is applied for both development and testing. See, acceptance criteria is for story. Story has to be implemented by Scrum development team. Testers are the part of the Scrum development team. As per Scrum, there is no separate title called tester or deployment. So you can choose cross-functional team. They can have testing and deployment skills also. So when I refer Scrum development team, that is not only for developers, Ridhita. So testers and operations team are part of the development team. In Scrum, only one title is allowed, that is Scrum developer title. Either tester or deployment engineers are part of the Scrum development team. Okay, so Meghana and Ridhita, hope you got the answers. Right, so this is an acceptance criteria. So during the backlog refinement discussion, more details will be added to the backlog. Writing acceptance criteria is one thing. And once not only acceptance criteria, kind of a preliminary estimate. So when I say preliminary estimate, it is related to fourth point, that is sizing of the stories. Okay, so now so sizing of the stories. So whenever you want to currency also, we do different sizes. So what are the currency sizes in India. So what are the current currency sizes in India? So if you look at currency sizes in India, are like you have 100 rupees note, 500, 2000 rupees note. So these are the currency sizes. So what I wanted to tell. So we first of all we need to size stories. We need to size our requirements based on the complexity. So we need to size our requirements based on the complexity. So sizing is all related to relative complexity. So how we size requirements in agile projects. So how we size requirements in agile projects? Number one. So we have different methods. We have different methods to do sizing of requirements. There are different methods. There are different methods to do sizing of requirements. There are different methods to do sizing of requirements. One, just a second. There are different methods to do sizing of requirements. One is story points. One is so sizing of requirements is important to relative measurement kind of thing. One is t-shirt sizing. So t-shirt sizing. So one is t-shirt sizing, and the second one is story points. Third one is ideal number of days required or hours required or days required. So t-shirt sizing, story points, hours required. So t-shirt sizing, story points, hours required. So these are the three methods we have to size user stories or product backlog items based on the complexity. Based on the complexity. Okay, so based on the complexity. So t-shirt sizing, story points, hours required based on the complexity. So t-shirt sizing. So t-shirt sizing means, so you can have different sizes, like let's say small size and medium, complex kind of. So this generally we use this kind of categorization or sizing for epics. Coming to story, so user stories, so user stories, we use a sequence of story points. We use sequence of story points. So sequence of story points will be used. Sequence of story points will be used. So sequence of story points means, so story point is a measurement. So for example, so you can choose 1, 2, 5, 8, 11, 13, for example, 20. So if the story is very simple, you can give story point as 1. Okay, so story point is a measurement which express relative complexity of the story when compared to smallest story. So for example, if you have two milk packets, 1 liter, 2 liter. So which is bigger one, 2? How you know? You are relatively comparing it with 1 liter. Similar fashion. So currency also. You have 1 rupee note, 2 rupee note, 5 rupee, 10, 20, 50, 100, 200, 500, 2000. So 2000 is bigger. How you know? If you compare 2000 with 500, 500 with 200. So it's a relative comparison. For that relative comparison, you can follow one sequence kind of thing. So any sequence of number can be followed. Okay. So you can give story points in a sequence. So generally, so we follow Fibonacci sequence. So it is easy to differentiate. So if you follow normal sequence, if you follow normal sequence kind of, if you follow normal sequence kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, then it is very difficult to differentiate, or the relative comparison is, it will take more time. So to avoid that, if it is very simple story, assign 1 story point. If it is very complex story, assign 20 story points. Now the question is, Sir Ramana, who assigns these story points? Who assigns these story points? So team assigns, Scrum development team. Scrum develop, when I say development team, it includes testers also, testers and deployment engineers, all the cross-functional team of developers, testers, operations guys. So story points means nothing but relative measurement to size your user story. For example, so every story will further break down to tasks. Epic is further break down to user stories that already we discussed. User stories, so user stories will further break down to tasks. So epics will further break down to user stories, and user stories will further break down to tasks. Okay, so hold on your questions. I'll be back. So first understand the concept. So tasks means, for example, you have a story. Let's say this is your story. So it will further break down how it will be how this will break down to user stories. This is a story. So task 1. Task 1. UI development could be a task. Task 2. Application development could be a task. Application logic building could be a task. Task 3. Database development could be a task. Task 4. Testing could be a task. Task 5. Deployment could be a task. So story breakdown to, so tasks are nothing but implementation details. So tasks are nothing but implementation details. So tasks are nothing but implementation details. So when I say tasks are implementation details, here, so UI development. So these tasks, identify the tasks and assign hours to tasks. So how much time is required? Okay, 5 hours. How much time is application logic building? 16 hours. How much time is required for database development? 3 hours. Testing 7 hours. So the team gives this task. So in simple words, so the large requirements of agile projects, are called as epics. Large requirements of agile projects are called as epics. And epics will further break down to user stories. So epics will further break down to user stories. Epics will further break down to user stories. And user stories will be break down to tasks. Tasks are just like implementation details. Epic level, so epic level to categorize different epics. So t-shirt sizing method can be used. So to categorize user stories, story points will be used. Story points. To categorize tasks, like to estimate tasks, hours can be used. This is one standard practice which are following. For example, so I mean you can ask a question, why liters are following for milk? Why you are not measuring milk in kgs? Because it's a universal standard. Okay, so why currencies are not measured in kgs? Why currencies are measured in something else? Why gold is measured in different grams kind of thing? Why gold is not measured in other measurement kind of? So you need not to think that level. So this is a universal standard. So epics categorized into t-shirt sizing, user stories categorized into story points, and in terms of t-shirt sizing, you can have one standard convention, that is, so Excel, L, medium, small. And user stories. So user stories convention could be, so user stories convention, but what user stories kind of convention could be, so you can follow some series of points, 1, 2, 3. You can choose whatever the series you want. There is no universal standard here. So you can choose whatever the series you want. Generally, people follow Fibonacci series kind of thing. In Fibonacci series also, the range of values which you want, you can choose. You means your team can choose. So tasks are expressed in hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, how many hours are required. So this kind of sizing or estimation we will do during the backlog refinement so that easily we can plan our sprint. But Ramana, for example, so we have a story, Ramana. So let's say we have this story, same story. How many story points we have to assign? Let's say I have this story. How many story points we have to assign? Who decides that? Okay, you are telling story points we have to assign. So a story points we have to assign. Story point is a measurement which is which indicates relative complexity. Excellent. Ramna, who assigns that story point? Who assigns that story point? Team assigns. How team assigns? How team assigns those story points? Hold on your questions. Park your questions. I will come. I'll discuss all your questions. So how team assigns those story points? So how team assigns those story points? So how team assigns those story points? Okay. So how team assigns those story points? Because your story points has a range 1, 2, 3, 5, and all. So how team assigns those story points? How team assigns those story points? Team has team can play. There is a method called planning poker game. Team play a method called planning poker game. So when I say planning poker game, okay, so planning poker game. So deck of step one, deck of cards will be given to all the team members. So what are the deck of cards? Like your 1, 2, 3, whatever this deck of cards, which series you want to follow. So the deck of cards will be given to all the team members. Let's say this is the series we finalized. So this deck of cards will be given to every team member, and once deck of cards given to every team member, so so PO explains rank one story, and clarify team doubts on rank one story. Clarify team doubts on rank one story. So PO explains rank one story and clarify doubts on rank one story. So PO explains, product owner explains rank one story and clarify team doubts on rank one story. Now team starts estimation. So every team member select a card and hide the card. Okay, so team select the card and hide the card. Card means every card has one number, story point, based on the complexity. Every story has one number based on the complexity. And now team starts estimation. Every team member select a card and hide the card based on the complexity. Once a card is, once everyone selects the card, then entire team flip cards they selected and display to others. Everyone, so which the card they selected and display to others. So once they display it to others, okay, so if So if everyone has taken, like, for example, member one, so team member one has taken 5 story points. If all the team members taken, if all the team members selected similar number or little close number, then that average will become that average or that will become the story point. That average will become the story point. For example, if there is a huge deviation, let's say one team member one selected 2 story point, member one selected 2 story point, member two selected 14 story points, let's say 11 story points. There is a huge difference. Then under the observations of remaining team members, okay, member 1 and 2 discuss, member 2 explain, member 1 and 2 explains. So under the observations of remaining team member 1 and 2 explains why they selected, I mean, they explains reason for those numbers, reason for their understanding of complexity. Now, after the discussion, entire team repeat the same. So entire team repeat the same. Entire team repeat the same game. Now, if this time they come to a closer number, they take the average of the number, and that will become the story point. It's very simple process. Logically, team is selecting rather than one person is assigning a story point. So team is selecting rather than one person assigning the story point. The team is selecting rather than one person is assigning. Team is selecting. So how team is selecting? So by planning poker game. What is planning poker game? Okay, step one. So like first we need to decide deck of cards. Okay, 1 point, 2, what are the story points? So each team member can select the card and flip the cards at the same time. So if it comes equal number, then that will become the estimate. If it is a disagreement, lack of agreement number, then rediscuss, replay the game. Rediscuss, replay the game till everyone comes to an agreement, or we call that scenario as the lack of agreement number. Or few projects they go with the average number. Also. I have seen in few projects they are proceeding with the average number also. Okay, so this is about estimation. So now, we'll discuss questions about how story points are assigned to stories. Yeah. So Ridhita Banerjee, hope you got how relative story points are, how to compare the story. So story points are assigned to stories. For example, let's say, I'll give you one more example also. So I have a story. So story 1, as a user, log in with user ID and password. Story 2, as a user, log in with user ID, password and OTP. Story 3, as a user, log in with user ID, password, OTP and CAPTCHA. So tell me which is complex. So which one can be given? Let's say if I want to give, if the team gives 2 story points, definitely this could be 3. Definitely this could be 5. Am I correct? Because when compared to story 1, story 3 is complex. How you know that? It's a relative comparison. So based on the conditions. So, right? So the team gives estimate. It is not one person assumption is going to be estimate. The team gives estimate and they discuss why they are giving that number. Yeah. So now any questions on how story points can be assigned to stories? How story points can be sized? How story points can be sized? Or how story points can be assigned to stories? So this method is called how story points can be assigned to stories. So this method is called planning poker game. This method is called planning poker game. Okay, so we are discussing backlog refinement meeting. So what is the purpose of backlog refinement meeting? So backlog refinement meeting purpose is, okay, so purpose of the backlog refinement meeting is adding details to stories. So we discussed how to add acceptance criteria, adding estimation, adding tasks required, and sizing. So all these we have discussed. So now backlog grooming is done. Backlog refinement is done. So we have added details to backlog. So let's see what we discussed till now in today's session. What we discussed till now in today's session. So we have created initial product backlog. We have created product owner created initial product backlog. So initial product backlog added with details like stories, acceptance. So each story acceptance criteria, tasks associated to stories, and so so it is added with the stories, each story acceptance criteria, tasks associated with the stories, and estimates. So these things are added. Now we are ready. So I mean, we know what are the important stories, what is their complexity. These things we know. Now the question is, okay, so how many stories? We have the details of the stories, but how many stories? A team can deliver? How many stories a team can deliver in sprint planning meeting? Sorry, how many stories a team can deliver in a sprint? So for this, to decide this number, so the team participate a Scrum ceremony called sprint planning meeting. So sprint planning meeting, so the backlog refinement is input to sprint planning meeting. So during the sprint planning meeting, team decides sprint goal, sprint backlog, sprint plan based on velocity of the previous sprints and capacity, based on the velocity of the previous sprints and capacity. So what is velocity, what is sprint planning? So these things. So tomorrow is the last session. During the base is ready now, and tomorrow we'll be discussing Scrum ceremonies. So what are the Scrum ceremonies? So Scrum ceremonies are number 1. So sprint planning meeting, sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review meeting. So daily Scrum, sprint review meeting. So sprint review meeting and sprint retrospective meeting. Daily Scrum, sprint review meeting, sprint retrospective meeting. So sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review meeting, sprint retrospective meeting. So these are the Scrum ceremonies. So these things we'll be discussing in tomorrow's session. Okay, so velocity, all those things also I'll cover in tomorrow's session.
Thanks for watching. For more videos, subscribe our channel and click on bell icon.